Good evening. First of all, welcome to St. James, especially on this really horrible weather night. We're delighted that you're here. Thank you for coming out and braving the weather. We believe it will be well worth your while. There are a few little details we want to take care of before we get to the main event this evening. First of all, a safety issue, which is that we want you to know where the exits are. The exits are straight behind you, and then to your, depending on what direction you're pointing, that away. Straight out that way. So it's basically an L shape. You can go out either exit in case of emergency. We have a restroom for you if you need to. It's right up here. You just go straight through this door, and it's immediately to your right. We do ask you to silence your phones during the talk. This is a really good time to do it right now, actually, while you're thinking about it. It's just courtesy for our speaker and for those who want to hear. And if you didn't bring a phone, all the better for you. Finally, before we get to an introduction, we should know that there is a reception, or there are two things going on immediately following the talk. One is a period of time for questions and answers, so that you'll be able to ask Mr. Bunten's questions, and then a reception in the reading room right here immediately following. We hope that you'll join us for that. We hope that when the talk is over, that you'll stay in your seats for announcements following the question and answer. And lastly, just a reminder, if you do not have one of these sheets, you can raise your hand and you can get one, I believe, because you'll want to have this for the talk itself. Okay. With all that in mind, between 1830 and 1865, the U.S. abolitionist movement grew into a powerful movement for justice. It crossed borders between African Americans and whites, men and women, evangelists and free thinkers, and northern reformers and southerners who bore witness in exile to their experiences. One of the major tools for the spread of abolitionist ideas was music and song. In this chat, we'll explore their variety and power, and as you've got one of these, we will sing tonight. Now, our speaker tonight is Peter Bunten. He's from Poughkeepsie, where he attended elementary, high school and college. In 1974, he moved to New York City, where he and his wife raised 2 daughters. Today, he lives in the Bronx with his wife. While always interested in history, Peter came to slavery history through involvement in various civil rights and women's rights causes. Deepening that interest, Peter, along with his sister, discovered that they had 2 great-grandfathers from Ulster County who fought in the Civil War. One was wounded, and one died of illness. Peter earned his master's degree in history at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, then found employment at Phillipsburg Manor in Tarrytown, you may know it, a former colonial site of enslavement. He discovered the Mid-Hudson Antislavery History Project around 2011, quickly joined it, and has been with it ever since. The Mid-Hudson Antislavery History Project began in 2006 as an informal group of scholars, educators, and local history buffs to bring the replica ship Amistad to Poughkeepsie. They then researched and wrote a book on the history of slavery and anti-slavery in Dutchess County, and began to offer story, interpretation, and lectures. The Mid-Hudson Anti-Slavery History Project sponsored the Dutchess Anti-Slavery Singers, which over the past 5 to 6 years has given dozens of performances of songs from the abolitionist period. With that background in mind, I invite you to join together to welcome our speaker, Peter Bunten.
Thank you for that, Chuck, and good evening, and welcome to everyone who is here. For a long time, I've been hearing about these fireside chats. I've looked a few of them up on YouTube, etc. Most recently, Barbara Sweet has been keeping me up to date on what's going on, and I am very honored to be here tonight. Now, let's see if we can make this work here. There we go, good. So Chuck gave a little bit of an introduction. I'm here under the auspices of the MHHHP, and one of the aspects of what we've done with our research in prior years is we work on interpreting that material that we know about the slavery and anti-slavery history right here in Dutchess County, which is very rich. And we're going to touch on a few aspects of that tonight, and also look at the legacies of that history and take a look at their impact today, and also relate them to ongoing struggles for racial justice in the United States. One of the main things that I've been involved in for the past couple of years is what we would call, I suppose, spreading the word, such as tonight's program. We are also charter members of the Underground Railroad Consortium of New York State, which began about 3 years ago, and we are linked with about 25 or 30 sites around the state, which are interpreting the history of the Underground Railroad. Also working in support of the Black History Committee, which comes out of Poughkeepsie, and the committee right now is working on developing a series of memorials for the enslaved and free blacks who lived in Poughkeepsie and the surrounding areas. We've had a very fruitful relationship with Will Tatum, who is your Dutchess County historian, as well as with the Dutchess County Historical Society in developing programs and speakers and projects such as that. We have published 2 books on the basis of the research we did around 2006 to 2009. We published a guide for Dutchess County, which identifies various sites around the county that had sites of free black communities, black churches, anti-slavery activities, etc. And we have also published a book of anti-slavery songs, some of the lyrics of which you have with you tonight. So I'm going to talk tonight about some of the highlights and important aspects of the wealth of anti-slavery music that was published during the antebellum period, roughly 1830 to 1863 or so. We're going to take a look at some of the major genres or categories of that music, the people involved, and the history that motivated these songwriters. But that's not all. No one went to an anti-slavery rally without singing. So we've got a full plate of songs on tap for you all to sing. Don't worry, you're going to know most of the music already. And we'll talk about that in a minute. If you haven't received the blue packet handout, we've got some more with you to give to you. Unfortunately, some of the wording got here. This is Joshua McCarter Simpson. In 1854, as a 33-year-old African-American living in Ohio, he published a collection of abolitionist lyrics. When his mind was filled, he wrote, with the, quote, horrid pictures of the condition of my people, he heard the voice of a spirit of poetry, urging him to write and sing about it. He said, you can sing what would be death to speak. You can sing what would be death to speak. So, he concluded, I began to write and sing. Horrid pictures of the condition of my people. Indeed, As many of you know, the conditions of enslavement were horrid, were terrible. Many of the songs that Simpson and others penned detailed or in other ways referred to some of those conditions. And tonight, we're going to look at the part of the anti-slavery movement attempting to overthrow and bring an end to chattel slavery in our country. That was the whole point of these songs, to galvanize the audience into action. We're going back about 175 years and take a look at the people who were opposed to slavery and one of the ways they showed that opposition. As Father Chuck noted, and as Joshua Simpson and others realized, they used songs and sing-alongs to get across the anti-slavery message. In the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, music and songs also played a key role in spreading the message and the feeling. Songs such as Keep Your Eyes on the Prize, This Little Light of Mine, We Shall Overcome, and scores of others. They all were important vehicles for rallying support and building camaraderie and spirit. And it was the same back in the antebellum period. We're going to see how these abolitionists took tunes that their audience would be familiar with, but replaced the usual words with sharp, powerful, and moving critiques of the institution of slavery. One of the most powerful ones that I'm familiar with is called America, a Parody. And we're all going to see right now how that works. Can everybody please open your blue handout to the first song? And those of you who feel like standing, I would welcome you to do that, because in this period, the original America and the lyrics that we know was kind of a de facto or an informal anthem for the United States. And that will be our anthem to start out, as indeed it was used to start out a lot of the anti-slavery rallies. So you know the music, it's just the lyrics that have changed. So let's try singing a verse or two. My country, 'tis of thee, stronghold of slavery, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, where man's rights deride, from every mountainside thy deed shall ring. Let's do the second verse. My native country thee, where all men are born free, if white their skin. I love thy hills and dales, thy mountains and pleasant trails, but hate thy Negro sails as foulest sin. Thank you. That was great. Some of you, I don't know, I'm a little skeptical of your anti-slavery credentials, but you'll improve as we go along. So a little later, we're going to come back to Joshua Simpson, and we're going to come back to this song. What we have here is a cover of 3 of the scores of books of anti-slavery lyrics that were published during this period. There were as many as 700 or more anti-slavery songs composed. 700. Many of these were developed for local use, such as at a church or a small meeting service. And most of the early ones had a religious theme to them. Now, if you recall, during this period, the 1820s to the 1830s, America was experiencing what historians have called the Second Great Awakening. It was a nationwide surge of evangelical zeal that provided the basis for a more radical form of anti-slavery, i.e., immediate abolition. A wave of fiery sermons denouncing slavery grew out of this movement, often accompanied by hymns using new words to express the anti-slavery passion. Others, who were less religious, were also ratcheting up the call to end slavery and incorporated songs at their rallies, anti-slavery meetings, and elsewhere. Singing was understood to be a much more powerful and effective vehicle to spread the word than any sermon could hope to be. George Clark, who published one of the earliest compilations of anti-slavery songs in 1844, observed that, quote, "Music has ever been the handmaid of liberty," unquote. Another listener, after attending a concert of black children singing anti-slavery songs, wrote, "I do sincerely believe that a concert of that kind will do more towards cutting people of prejudice than the best sermon which the most able orator could give." Should have said curing instead of cutting. And another person observed, quote, "Speechifying, even of the better sort, did less to interest, purify, and subdue minds than this irresistible anti-slavery music." And as Joshua Simpson realized, singing would allow one to express the horrors of slavery in a way that talking could not. Now, moving outside the bounds of churches, abolitionist music provided a meeting point for an array of musical traditions, both sacred and secular. Religious music, especially via Methodism, where over 1/5 of the congregants were black, lent themes and hymns to this new expression. Black rhythms and influences could be found in many of the new songs, though often these were criticized by white pastors for what they called its, quote, "merry chorus manner and hallelujah songs." Likewise, folk hymns, often originating in the South, began to infiltrate the music of Northerners. Minstrelsy, though anathema to blacks and many whites, by the 1840s was too widely known and popular not to be influential. A nice irony of building new upon the old, as we're going to see. More than one composer lamented this new mixing of the old with the new, sacred with secular. Music, alas, too long has been pressed to obey the devil. Who on the part of God will rise, and innocent sounds recover? Well, with anti-slavery sentiment growing, the country would not soon see again innocence. Now, these songs can be grouped into noticeable themes or genres. Themes were added as the years progressed and anti-slavery advocates responded to developments on the national political level. And tonight we're going to look at 4 of these genres: the testimony of slavery, protest as citizenship, flight from slavery, and the turn to electoral politics. For each of these, we'll examine some aspects of the theme, that is, its background in abolitionist history, how the developing anti-slavery movement influenced the creation of new songs or new lyrics to existing songs, and examples of some of those songs. And for a few of those, we're going to sing. Now, if any of you are starting to get a little worried about singing, just recall a few minutes ago how easy it was to sing America a Parody. And I don't mean to say that the words were easy, but the tune was known to all of us, I believe, in this room. And it's that singular feature, how the songwriters constructed their songs by attaching new words to an existing tune. That's what allowed abolitionists to spread their message more easily. Think about the first time you came across a new song you had to learn, with both the words and the music unfamiliar to you. Unless you were already a trained singer or musician, you undoubtedly stumbled for a while until you got it. Now reflect on what we just sang. Because you could concentrate just on reading the lyrics and not worry about the tune, you essentially already knew the song. And that was one of the great things about these songs. Now, this method of grafting new words onto old music is not something the abolitionists invented. It followed a time-honored tradition throughout history and was already commonplace in America by the time of the movement. And it remains so today. Star-Spangled Banner is an example. Francis Scott Key wrote the words to this song in 1814 while watching the bombardment of Baltimore Harbor. The music he chose to accompany it was a popular English drinking song, To Anacreon in Heaven. The original song lyrics were written in 1775 by an Englishman by the name of John Stafford in honor of the Greek poet Anacreon, who was a wine lover. That song was first performed at a gentleman's club in London. The lyrics to America were written in 1831 or 32 by Samuel Francis Smith, who was a student at Andover Theological Seminary at the time. He took for his music the God Save the Queen tune from composer Musione Clementi's Third Symphony, written around the year 1800. That musical theme, original author is unknown, but it probably goes back to as early as the 1500s, possibly written by an English composer named John Bull. America was the unofficial anthem of the United States until 1931. Now, if we jump ahead to the 20th century, many of the famous songs of the Civil Rights Movement were reworkings of earlier songs. We Shall Overcome had its roots in a 19th century hymn called I'll Overcome Someday. Now, in the 1820s, African American tobacco workers changed the title to the one we know today. And by the time Pete Seeger started working with it and learning it, he added some verses, and verses continued to be added to that song depending on the conditions of the civil rights action. So, testimony of slavery. It's appropriate that we begin with those who experienced the horrors of slavery. Now, the Atlantic slave trade established systems of slavery which had repercussions that continue today. Slavery became a deeply established component of the economic system and social structure with important political effects. While on the one hand, the Republic struggled to define and extend democratic ideals, espoused most clearly in the Declaration of Independence, regional tensions, especially over slavery, grew significantly. Now, our own colony, then state of New York, and Dutchess and Ulster County played a big role in this. In the 1700s, there were more enslaved people in New York than anywhere north of Maryland. Now, probably the most famous of these during that period is Sojourner Truth. Truth was born Isabella Baumfree around 1797 in Ulster County, and she remained a slave for the first 30 years of her life. Her father was brought here from what is modern-day Ghana, and her mother was the daughter of enslaved parents from Guinea. Full freedom for Sojourner didn't arrive until 1827, the very last year of legal enslavement in New York. Now, you can kind of disregard this and look at your own sheet because this doesn't translate very well. Now, Sojourner was, after her freedom, she was an inveterate traveler, leaving New York soon and going on to a life of advocacy for women and the remaining enslaved men and women in the country. She also wrote songs. This one, Sojourner Truth's Hymn, was composed in 1851 and is a perfect example of our first theme. In it, she catalogs the conditions of enslavement against which she is fighting. Slaves have had their rights taken away. There is no compensation for the work they do. They don't share in the fruits of their labor. Their bodies are injured from the work they do, and they are scarred from punishment by the whip. And perhaps worst of all, mothers shriek in wild despair. To have their children torn from them on the slave auction block. Excuse me. I've sung a lot of these songs for many years, and there are a few that just keep coming back and haunting. Now, Truth in the final verse goes on to admonish white reformers' priorities, saying it's all well and good to have sympathy for the plight of others overseas, but they should take notice of the base tyranny right here at home, beneath the stripes and stars. She first sang this in 1851, calling it a hymn and using the movement from a hymn known as the plenary. That tune originated from the Scott song Auld Lang Syne, which was written somewhere around 1700. It was a common tune used frequently in various music, most notably, of course, when Robert Burns set his poem to it, in words we now sing at the end of each year. So since everyone here knows the tune to Auld Lang Syne, I think we should sing Sojourner's song together. So let's take that out and see what we can make of it. So I'll start off. I am pleading for my people to have their rights restored, for they have long been toiling and yet have no reward. They are forced the crops to culture, but not for them they yield, although but late and early they labor in the field. Let's continue with verse 2. While I bear upon my body the scars of many a gash, I'm pleading for my people who groan beneath the lash. I am pleading for the mothers who gaze in wild despair upon the hated auction block and see their children there. Now, perhaps Sojourner had in mind another poem popular at the time when she was writing that second verse. Poet John Greenleaf Whittier was born into a Quaker family in Massachusetts, and early on in his career, with the support and prodding of William Lloyd Garrison, he took up the abolitionist cause. His earliest poems addressed the slavery issue, and one, The Farewell, is subtitled "Of a Virginia Slave Mother to her daughters sold in Southern bondage. And that poem was set to music by George Clark and published in 1844, using the poem's repeated first line as the new song's title. Its first verse reads, "Gone, gone, sold and gone, to the rice swamp dank and lone, where the slave whip ceaseless swings, where the noisome insect stings, where the fever demon strews poison with the falling dews, where the sickly sunbeams glare through the hot and misty air. Gone, gone, sold and gone, to the rice swamp dank and lone. From Virginia's hills and waters, woe is me, my stolen daughters." Whittier probably got the image for this poem after reading a story that was widely reported in the northern papers about an enslaved mother in Virginia whose daughters were sold away to the Deep South. So our second theme, our second genre, we call protest as citizenship. We've already looked at the song America a Parody, which we could describe as the epitome of this genre. Also called critical patriotism, the protest as citizenship idea is distinguished by its use of popular patriotic tunes and substituting new lyrics which turn the song's original meaning on its head. So America, a Parody, is a powerful, biting commentary on what patriotism was meant to be. Now also remember, America was kind of our de facto national anthem, was sung much more frequently than the Star-Spangled Banner, which became popular much later and didn't become the United States anthem until 1931. So these new lyrics that were set to patriotic songs offered a sharp critique of slavery's existence in a land where citizens celebrated the so-called Republican liberty. New lyrics were attached to America, the Star-Spangled Banner, Yankee Doodle, and many others. One other set of lyrics to the same tune of America, the first is called Rise, Sons of Africa. And the first verse goes, "Ye who in bondage pine, shut out from light divine, bereft of hope, whose limbs are worn with chains, whose tears bedew our plains, whose blood our glory stains, in gloom who grope." Some abolitionists were harshly critical of America's continuing support of slavery. Frederick Douglass spoke for many of these in his famous and richly sarcastic address delivered in 1852, titled "The Meaning of July 4th for the Negro." Now I'm going to put somebody on the spot. Can I have a volunteer to read Frederick Douglass's message? We have a microphone. Somebody want to stand up and read that? All right, you're gonna get away easy this time. I'm gonna call on my wife to read it, and then somebody's gonna have to read Higginson's reply. It's great when you get to hear these from other people, like yourselves in an anti-slavery audience.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass unaffronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour.
1852. Years after the Civil War ended and slavery had been abolished, there remained countless African Americans and some whites who couldn't abide the nationalism inherent in our country's patriotic songs and celebrations. Not everyone was as bitter about the inconsistencies between the American promise and slavery's realities. Enslaved people themselves were some of the strongest advocates for the ideas and the ideals of the United States, as contained in the Declaration of Independence's anthem, "All men are created equal." Those words were seen as the promise of what the United States could be, and they took it to heart. Despite repeated setbacks and continued slavery, many blacks held those words as a picture of the future of the country. Continue to fight now, we will make a new future. In a way, they saw the current condition as an aberration that in time would be righted. Their allegiance to that promise was strong. Now, one of the most compelling instances of this is the overflow of volunteers to the U.S. colored troops. When blacks were finally given a green light to prove their fighting mettle during the Civil War, not until 1863, almost 200,000 took up the call to fight. One of the most stirring instances of what I'm talking about can be found in an incident that took place in Port Royal in the midst of the Civil War. In November 1861, the Union Navy bombarded and captured this key Confederate stronghold along the coast, thereby securing the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Upper Georgia for the Union. As the fighting began, the region's slaveholders abandoned their plantations, leaving behind 8,000 black men and women and children, who from then until the end of the war would live under the protection of the Union Army. Now, at the end of 1862, one of the officers in charge, Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson, that may ring a bell in your mind. Oh yeah, he's from Massachusetts, and oh yeah, he funded John Brown's raids. That's him. He was helping to prepare an Emancipation Day celebration. Now, the proclamation had been announced earlier in the fall, and on January 1st, 1863, it was to go into effect. There was much anticipation and excitement among the now free black people. So on that night of January the 1st, let's hear what Thomas Wentworth Higginson had to say. Now, can I get another volunteer now? Yes, sir. Here, we want to take the mic? Okay, nice and loud.
The services began at 11:30 with prayer by our chaplain. Then the President's proclamation was read. The very moment the speaker had ceased, and just as I took and waved the flag, there suddenly arose, close beside the platform, a strong male voice, but rather cracked and elderly, into which two women's voices instantly blended, singing, "My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing." I never saw anything so electric. It made all other words cheap. It seemed the choked voice of a race at last unloosing. After it was ended, tears were everywhere. The light of the whole day was in those unknown people's song.
Thank you very much. A choked voice was unloosed. The life of the whole day was in those unknown people's songs. Well, the country might not have known those people, but those people knew what the country's ideals meant to them. There's a lot of contradictions here. History is complicated. The next section of songs are what I would call escapes from slavery. The most influential piece of American abolitionist writing was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel drawn in part from slave narratives and other testimony. Stowe's story, originally published in segments over the course of the year, was published in full in 1852, and it's a story that depicts the plight of both blacks and whites caught up in the evil system of slavery. It became one of the century's greatest bestsellers, selling as many as 300,000 copies in the first year. 300,000 in 1852. By some accounts, the novel ranked second only to the Bible in sales. As slavery came to the fore in national politics, Uncle Tom's Cabin became a channel for debate over slavery. Thousands of essays, sermons, broadside songs, and others were inspired by the book. Now, some years before writing her book, Stowe had lived in Ohio and seen firsthand the operation of what was known as the Underground Railroad. And by the 1850s, the railroad was alive in many areas of the North, including right here in Dutchess County. Now, the book's publication came hard on the heels of, and was written partly in reaction to, the harsh provisions of the new Fugitive Slave Act, which was passed by Congress in 1850. That law strengthened the rights of Southern slave owners to find and have returned to them their so-called property. And some of you may know this fun. It's an amazing story about Henry Box Brown. So this is a real-life story of escape to freedom. And probably nothing compares to that of this one. Henry Brown was born into slavery in Virginia around 1815. He married and had 3 children. However, slave laws did not recognize the marriage rights of slaves. And Henry's wife and children were sold away. He never saw them again. And after this, he decided to escape. There was a white storekeeper and a free black man who were there to help him, and they contacted an anti-slavery society in Philadelphia. And the society there agreed that if Brown was shipped in a large box, I'm sorry, it's a little funny, they would open the package as soon as it arrived. Now, Brown's helpers put him in the crate and took it to the Adams Express Company. It took 27 hours for the box to reach Philadelphia. Now, while inside, Brown traveled by wagon, railroad, steamboat, and ferry. Sometimes the box was turned upside down, but he stayed quiet. And this is a sketch of Brown arriving in Philadelphia. And in addition to the tremendous notoriety he gained as having been shipped in a box to freedom, he had a long career as an anti-slavery reformer and speaker. Some of you may have seen this grave marker at the rural cemetery, John Boulding, right here in our own Dutchess County. He was in the middle of another incident of the Fugitive Slave Act. Around 1840, Boulding ran away from his South Carolina owner and found his way to Poughkeepsie, where he stayed. In 1851, a traveler from South Carolina recognized him and told his former master. Boulding was seized by U.S. Marshals, taken to New York City, and tried in a special federal court. These courts were set up specifically to handle cases of kidnapped and runaway slaves affected by the Fugitive Slave Act. They had no right to habeas corpus. He was convicted and returned to his owner. This case became a sensation, one of a dozen or so instances that received national attention. Now, citizens of Poughkeepsie, led by local abolitionists, raised the $2,000 that the owner demanded for Boulding's freedom. He returned to Poughkeepsie in November of that year, where he lived with his wife, Henrietta, the remainder of his life. Now, John Boulding came only as far north as Poughkeepsie. And many other freedom seekers, that is a more respectful term than runaway slave, found some degree of safety in other northern cities. The fictional Eliza and her son didn't stop until they got to Canada, which for most freedom seekers was the gold standard. After Great Britain outlawed slavery throughout its domain in 1833, Canada became the goal of many men and women escaping from the South. Major border crossings at Niagara Falls and Detroit saw a regular flow of people escaping from bondage to freedom. Canada had for many years been a symbol of freedom for Americans, African Americans, but after 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act, it became even more a place of refuge. You'll recall Joshua Simpson, who we met at the very beginning. One of his many anti-slavery songs is The Bondman's Home, whose lyrics include this line: "We have a happy home far, far away, where slavery is not known in Canada." Several others he wrote rejoiced in the runaways' freedom, including this one that we have in front of us, Away to Canada. It was written in 1852, and here Simpson purposely used a minstrel song, a minstrel tune, O Susanna, which probably all of us know. And his reasoning is a perfect example of the origin and structure of this irresistible anti-slavery music. My object in my selection of tunes, he wrote, is to kill the degrading influence of those comic Negro songs, which are too common among our people, and change the flow of those sweet melodies into more appropriate and useful channels. So let's sing Away to Canada. It's the same, it's the music to O Susanna, so you can let that be your guide. And you'll note in the lyrics that the speaker refers to British emancipation, crossing the lake, Erie or Ontario to Canada, and that he goes alone, leaving his wife behind. So we can do the first couple of verses. So I'm on my way to Canada, the cold and dreary land. The dire effects of slavery I can no longer stand. My soul is vexed within me so to think that I'm a slave. I'm now resolved to strike the blow for freedom or the grave. O righteous Father, wilt thou not pity me, and aid me on to Canada, where colored men are free? I heard old Queen Victoria say, if we would all forsake our native land of slavery and come across the lake, that she was standing on the shore with arms extended wide to give us all a peaceful home behind the rolling tide. Farewell, old master, oh, that's enough for me. I'm going straight to Canada, where colored men are free. You're getting better at this as we go along, and it's great, it's great. So the last of our four themes or genres is what we call the turn to electoral politics. So the 1850s brought a dramatic shift in the anti-slavery movement, even a couple of years before. By that time, the abolitionists, remember, who were looking for immediate end to slavery, were no longer a small minority of the anti-slavery movement. Their influence had grown. They had allies, and the movement began to gain political clout. Increasing numbers of Northerners feared what they called the Southern slave power and its influence over the national government. And likewise, pro-slavery Southerners felt embattled, their property endangered. And in turn, as their political representatives made strenuous efforts to protect slavery at any cost, Northern mistrust deepened. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, Uncle Tom's Cabin, 1852, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 54, Bleeding Kansas and John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry from 55 to 59, and the Dred Scott decision in 59, all had major impacts on the national parties and on the anti-slavery movement. There was heated, intense debate within the ranks of the anti-slavery folks about whether the movement should get involved in politics. And if so, which of the national parties or other parties gave them the most chance of success. Now, originally, for Garrison and his followers, who eschewed in the 30s, said, no way are we getting involved in politics. And those who reflected the more radical branch that still called for unequivocal emancipation, they felt party politics would dirty their hands and corrupt the movement. But by the end of the 1840s into 1850 or so, anti-slavery and politics were wedded together. Now, in the end, one national party would be destroyed, that was the Whigs. The other become a wholly Southern party, that was the Democrats. Two smaller rump parties would try to establish themselves as the rightful home of the anti-slavery message. Those were the Liberty Party and Free Soil, and a brand new national party would be created, the Republican Party. I should have said Northern Party, because a truly national party, national politics would cease for the duration of the Civil War. Now, this mixing of movement and politics became the source for another strain of anti-slavery songs, that which espoused some specific politicians and policies and political movements, often at the same time criticizing other politicians and other movements. No one did this more successfully than a group known as the Hutchinson Family Singers. Now, they kept their light hidden underneath the basket for a number of years by singing just at some local rallies in New York and Boston. But in 1843, they launched a career as touring performers, and they became, if not an overnight, certainly within a short period of time, a national sensation. As popular as some of the rock stars and music stars of today. The group was made up of 3 brothers, all in their 20s when they started, and their sister Abigail, who was only 14. They occasionally were joined by a 4th brother, Jesse, who is the author of our final song in these genres, called Get Off the Track. Now, Get Off the Track, by accounts of historians, was perhaps the most famous of all the anti-slavery songs. It was published during the campaign of 1844. Now, it was denounced by Whigs because of its rejection of their candidate, Henry Clay. And we're going to see that in verse 3. Roads to emancipation cannot rest on clay foundation. The Hutchinsons supported the rival Liberty Party candidate, James G. Birney, which likely drew votes away from Clay and allowed the Democrats to elect James Polk. And Polk did indeed what the Hutchinsons wrote in their verse, annex Texas, and slavery spread to Texas. One pro-Whig newspaper called the song offensive trash. Because of its underlying anti-slavery message, the song was amenable to political commentary as the years passed. So we could keep adding verses. And one verse references John Fremont, who was the presidential candidate of the newly formed Republican Party in 1856. And the next verse lauds Abraham Lincoln, who came along, of course, in 1860. Now, not to be forgotten here is how the song emphasizes the dynamic new power of the railroad, symbol of prosperity and progress. Now, true to the form of much anti-slavery music, the Hutchinsons grafted their lyrics onto the popular minstrel tune, Old Dan Tucker, offering reformers a way to enjoy the lively music without endorsing the racial stereotypes usually found in minstrel. Now, if you want to hear a fabulous modern rendering of Old Dan Tucker, you need to listen to Bruce Springsteen's version on his album, The Seeger Sessions. So you should all go home tonight, pull up YouTube, and listen to it. It's astounding. Now, you all got you've all got the song there. So I'm going to run through the first verse slowly so you get a feel for it. It's a very easy tune, and the chorus just repeats itself. Then we're all going to repeat the first verse together. Then we'll sing the next 4 verses all together. Now, just like a train, we're going to have a very slow start. But with each verse, we're going to pick up steam, and by verse 5, it's Katie bar the door. You got to be ready. All right? And don't forget that big huzzah at the end. All right, so. Oh, the car emancipation rides majestic through our nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty, a nation's glory. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along through the nation, freedom's car, emancipation, roll it along, roll it along, roll it along through the nation, freedom's car, emancipation. Now, some of you are singing, we'll just go on to the second verse, and we're going to pick up the pace a little bit here now, okay? Men of various predilections, frighten, run in all direction, merchants, editors, physicians, lawyers, priests, and politicians, get out of the way. Get out of the way. Get out of the way, every station. Clear the track of emancipation. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Get out of the way, every station. Clear the track, emancipation. 1, 2, 3, 4. Railroads to emancipation cannot rest on clay foundations, and the road that Polk erects us leads to slavery and to Texas. Pull up the rails, pull up the rails, pull up the rails. Emancipation cannot rest on such foundation. Pull up the rails, pull up the rails. Pull up the rails, emancipation cannot rest on such foundation. Okay, we're going to pick up the speed now. With old Abe to go before us and the flag of freedom o'er us, we will shout the sounding chorus. We're for freedom and reform. With old Abe, with old Abe. With old Abe to go before us, we're for freedom and reform. With old Abe, with old Abe, with old Abe to go before us, we're for freedom and reform. Okay, make sure you take a deep breath now. See the people run to meet us at the depots, thousands greet us, all the seats with exultation, in the car emancipation. Huzzah, huzzah. Huzzah, 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 emancipation soon will bless our happy nation. Huzzah, 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 emancipation soon will bless our happy nation. Huzzah! Wow, that's very good, that's very good. So, on January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. It didn't end slavery in the states that were in rebellion, but nor was it purely symbolic. And we've seen how recently freed slaves at Port Royal responded to it. So it's fitting that this important day become a remembrance of one who did so much to fire up anti-slavery sentiment. One whose visage could be captured as straightforward, though stern, and another as an avenging Old Testament prophet. Now, the words to the President's Proclamation, which is on the very back page, they were originally published in The Liberator, Garrison's newspaper, in January 1863. And once again, the music comes from the traditional John Brown's Body, whose origins are in the religious camp music that we talked about earlier, sometime in the late 1700s or early 1800s. Now, we're going to end on this song, and what I'd like to do is the way the Duchess Anti-Slavery singers is I'd like us to sing the first verse quietly like a hymn. In the second verse, we can sing at a kind of a normal volume. And the third verse, a little bit like a march, because the Union soldiers in the Civil War sang this repeatedly. And they sang it when they were marching. So they took the music as kind of a march to help them get through. So, once again, we know the music. John Brown died on a scaffold for the slave. Dark was the hour when we dug his hallowed grave. Now God avenges the life he gladly gave. Freedom reigns today. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Freedom reigns today. John Brown sowed, and his harvesters are we. Honor to him who has made the bondman free. Loved evermore shall our noble ruler be. Freedom reigns today. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Freedom reigns today. John Brown's soul through the world is marching on. Hail to the hour when oppression shall be gone. All men will sing in the better ages dawn. Freedom reigns today. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Freedom reigns today. Thank you all very much.
There is time for questions.
There's time for questions. If anybody has a
If you
question.
have questions, Steve will go around and give you the microphone, but you have to raise your hand.
You talked a little bit about the Underground Railroad, and I lived on Long Island for many years,
Yep.
and I know it went through there right past my college, the SUNY College at Old Westbury. But I do know that there were many songs that the slaves used to let one another know when it was safe to escape, to go across the river. Would you talk a little bit about that, or is that another lecture?
Yeah, that's a complicated issue. I gave a talk last night down in Wappingers on the Underground Railroad, and a question came about the so-called quilts. First of all, let me start out by saying that running away was an incredible act of bravery. And we need to remember that the vast majority of enslaved people emancipated themselves. Certainly there was help along the way if they were lucky to find it, or if they had some kind of a system set up. And it would have been dangerous to cross during the day someplace, crossing the Sound, crossing a river, walking through an open field, no question about it. The mechanism in those cases, if they already were given instructions. So when Frederick Douglass came up from Maryland the second time that he tried to escape, he was successful, and he got help from people in New York City who were in touch with other cities. Up north here, even in Poughkeepsie, and also up along the coast. He eventually wound up in Rhode Island and a few other places. So he was given contacts and names and churches and places to look for. Most of the freedom seekers did not have that. They struck out on their own. Harriet Tubman struck out on her own. She got a little direction. So the means by which they moved from one place to another were varied. They might take a boat. They might have a wagon that could hide them. Here in the Hudson Valley, as river traffic increased after 1807 and the steamboat, most of the freedom seekers, we believe, actually traveled by the water route rather than coming up through Dutchess County with the Quakers on the east side, etc. So if they knew someone where they were at point A, and point A person said, if you go there 2 miles down the road, look for this house, and this person will be ready, waiting for you. But that portion in between was very risky, So it was by word of mouth. And hopefully they made it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Let me just, one more point on the Underground Railroad. I know it's not our topic, although we did talk about it. The best guess, and remember, part of the problem with the Underground Railroad is the lack of data, of hard data. The best guess of historians right now is that maybe 50,000 enslaved people went through the process of coming up and being helped by the Underground Railroad. When the war began in 1861, who knows how many enslaved people were in the South? 4 million. Now, 50,000 is not insignificant, but 4 million. So we need to balance some of this history here. Somebody was going to, yes?
I just showed an image of, I think, a grave marker of
John Bolding, yes.
Where is that?
It's in the rural cemetery. Yes, Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery. As far as we know, there was no image or drawing of him at that time. But we do have, the marker was put in, yep. All right, yes,
There's one.
go ahead.
There's a microphone coming
Yeah.
up.
Oh, okay.
Speak right into it.
Early on, you showed us a picture of a book with Underground Railroad sites. Is that available? How do we get to do those?
Talk to me afterwards.
I
I have a
will.
copy here that I can show you what it looks like, the
Thank
Dutchess
you.
County Guide. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one more at least.
All right. Okay, well, listen again, thank you so much. It was a great honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Peter, it's our tradition here to have a small gift for our speaker. So Peter, I'd like to offer you this as a small gift, a token of our thanksgiving for your coming here.
Great, it's a bar of chocolate.
It's a
I can have something to eat on
It's-
the way home.
It's not a bar of chocolate. It's not chocolate, just saying. Now, before we get further on, there are a couple of announcements I would like to make. So I hope that you'll bear with me for just a minute. One of which is that on the back of your programs, you'll notice that there are other talks in the Fireside Chat series. March 5th is the Stone Walls of Hyde Park, presented by Patricia Weber. And then on April 2nd, Harry Hopkins, FDR's assistant, president, and friend. So those are the two ones. I'm going to take one moment of personal privilege also to mention that in the topic of slavery, I will also be giving a talk on February 29th at Adrian's Library. Thank you, Shannon, for inviting me to that. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. And as another point of personal privilege, that same day, immediately following that lecture, I will be going over to Capola's. The Hyde Park Education Foundation is doing a fundraiser, and I will be part of that fundraiser as well. If you're interested in that one, there's a poster on the wall in there. You can look at that later on. So those are the two things coming up. Wanted to thank several people involved in this because it is difficult work. And it was dicey. We weren't sure what the weather was going to allow for us. So I want to thank, first of all, Peter for being here. We're delighted that you came all the way across the river, or all the way up here in this weather. So thank you for doing that. We thank those who ran who are running our reception, which we hope you will stay for, especially Mike Fenwick and Donna Kaufman-Tracy. We're delighted that they are putting so much work into it, and everyone else who baked for it. We thank, again, the founder of this program, Sue DeLorenzo, who, even though she has retired from it, she's still working it, let me tell you. So thank you for that. And for everyone else who has been involved, and to you for coming here. I think those are the only announcements I have. Peter, do you have any last words? Because otherwise I'm going to send them to get food.
No, did we mention Del Banco's talk this Sunday?
No, but if you want to say something about that.
Yes, this Sunday at the Wallace Center, Andrew Del Banco, you may know Andrew's work. He normally writes about U.S. literature, but he has recently published a book to wide acclaim on the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act and what it says about America. If you can get in, we already moved his talk from the small theater into a much larger room because the 160 seats, well, you don't have to pay to get in, but you have to register. They were taken up in about one day. So we moved it to an area where we can seat maybe 200 at the Wallace Center. So if you're interested in going, I would go online like when you get home tonight and register if you can. I'm sure it's going to be a great talk.
Thank you very much. And with that, I invite you to join us right in the reading room for a reception. Thanks again.